The scream tore through the night air of the boarding house in Pioche, Nevada, so piercing that Roswell Turner jolted awake 3 rooms down, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver on his nightstand before his mind caught up with his reflexes. It was 1878, and this mining town had seen its share of violence, but something about that sound felt different, raw with a terror that came from somewhere deeper than any physical threat. He swung his legs out of bed, pulling on his trousers over his long johns, and stepped into the hallway. Other doors remained closed, the miners and drifters who called this place home too exhausted from their labors to be roused by anything short of gunfire. But Roswell had always been a light sleeper, a habit born from years of working cattle drives where danger could come at any moment. The scream had come from the room at the end of the hall, the one the landlady said she had rented to a young woman just that afternoon. Roswell hesitated outside the door, aware of the impropriety but unable to ignore what he had heard. He knocked softly. "Miss, are you all right in there?" Silence answered him at first. Then he heard movement, the creak of bed ropes and soft footsteps approaching the door. It opened just a crack, and in the dim light from the oil lamp she must have lit, he could make out a pale face framed by dark hair that fell in disheveled waves past her shoulders. "I apologize for disturbing everyone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but steady despite the tears he could see on her cheeks. "I am fine now." "That did not sound fine, miss. That sounded like someone in mortal danger." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. It was not fear of him, but a bone-deep weariness that no woman her age should carry. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, he guessed, close to his own 27 years. "It was just a dream," she said. "Please return to your rest. I am sorry to have woken you." She started to close the door, but Roswell found himself placing his hand gently against it. "My name is Roswell Turner. I have the room 3 doors down. If you need anything, or if the dreams come back, you just knock on my door, you hear." She studied him for a long moment, and he became acutely aware that he was standing in a hallway in his undershirt talking to a woman in her nightgown, but she did not seem scandalized, only tired. "Beatrice Vaughn," she said finally. "And thank you, Mr. Turner, but I have been managing these dreams for a long time. I doubt they will stop now." She closed the door before he could respond, and Roswell stood there for a moment longer before returning to his own room. Sleep did not come easily after that. He kept listening, waiting for another scream, but the night remained quiet. Morning found him at the small dining room where the landlady, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had come to Nevada during the railroad construction and stayed after her husband died in a mining accident, served breakfast to her tenants. Roswell was early, as was his habit, and he sat alone with his coffee and fried potatoes when Beatrice Vaughn descended the stairs. In the daylight streaming through the windows, he could see her more clearly. She wore a simple blue dress with a high collar, her dark hair pinned up neatly, and despite the shadows under her eyes, she was striking. Not in the painted way of the saloon girls or the delicate way of the ranch owners' daughters he had known, but with a kind of quiet strength that showed in the set of her shoulders and the directness of her gaze. She hesitated when she saw him, then seemed to steel herself and walked to the table, taking a seat across from him. "I wanted to thank you properly for your concern last night," she said without preamble. "It was kind of you to check on me. Anyone would have done the same, Miss Vaughn." "Would they? I have found that most people prefer to ignore disturbances that do not directly concern them." Roswell could not argue with that assessment. He had seen enough of human nature in his years to know she spoke the truth. "What brings you to Pioche?" he asked instead. She accepted a plate of food from Mrs. Chen with a grateful nod before answering. I am to be the new schoolteacher. The previous one left rather suddenly, I am told, and they were desperate enough to hire someone through correspondence. We need a good teacher, Roswell said. The children here deserve better than the rough education they have been getting. And what brings a cowboy to a mining town, Mr. Turner? There is not much call for cattle work in these mountains. He appreciated her directness. Too many women he had known danced around questions, but Beatrice seemed to value straight talk. I am here tracking a horse thief, he said. Fellow stole a prize stallion from a ranch down near Carson City where I was working. Trail led here, but it has gone cold. I have been doing odd jobs while I search. Have you always been a cowboy? Since I was 16 and ran away from a farm in Missouri that was more burden than blessing. My father drank away what little we had, and my mother died trying to hold it all together. I figured I could make my own way, and I have. She nodded slowly, and he saw understanding in her eyes, the recognition of one person who had known hardship seeing it in another. We all run from something, I suppose. What are you running from, Miss Vaughn? The question hung between them, more intimate than he had intended. She took a bite of her food, chewing slowly, and he thought she might not answer. But then she set down her fork and met his eyes. Ghosts, Mr. Turner. I am running from ghosts. Before he could ask what she meant, 2 other tenants clattered down the stairs arguing about a poker game, and the moment passed. Beatrice finished her breakfast quickly and excused herself, saying she needed to visit the schoolhouse and assess what supplies she would need. Roswell watched her go, troubled by something he could not quite name. He spent the day asking around about the horse thief, showing the sketch he had made of the man based on descriptions from witnesses. No one had seen him, or if they had, they were not talking. Pioche was the kind of town where people minded their own business, where the law was more suggestion than rule, and where a man could disappear easily if he knew the right people. By evening, Roswell found himself at the saloon, nursing a whiskey and thinking about Beatrice Vaughn and her ghosts. He had his own, he supposed, the memory of his mother's worn hands and defeated eyes, the fellow ranch hand who had been trampled by a spooked horse while Roswell watched, helpless, the woman in Cheyenne who had promised to wait for him and married a shopkeeper instead. You look like a man with troubles, a voice said beside him. Roswell glanced over to find an older man with a weathered face and a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. Name is Bill Hendricks. You are the fellow asking about horse thieves. Roswell Turner. And yes, I have been tracking a man who stole a valuable stallion. Hendricks ordered a drink and settled onto the stool beside him. That would be Caleb Morris. He passed through here about 2 weeks ago, sold a fine-looking horse to a rancher east of town for a fraction of what it was worth, then disappeared into the hills. Word is he is hiding out in one of the abandoned mining camps up in the mountains. Which camp? That is the question, is it not? There are dozens of them, and most are death traps. Unstable shafts, rotten timber, no water. A man could search for months and find nothing but trouble. Roswell considered this. Why are you telling me this? You do not strike me as the helpful sort. Hendricks laughed, a dry sound like wind through dead grass. Because Morris is not my problem. He is yours. But if you go up into those mountains unprepared, you will die, and I will have to deal with the paperwork. So take some advice. Get yourself a good map, plenty of supplies, and someone who knows the territory, and do not go alone. I work alone. Then you will die alone. Your choice. Hendricks finished his drink and stood. Oh, and Turner, that new school teacher who arrived yesterday. She has been asking around town about strange happenings, unexplained deaths, old stories. You might want to find out why. Woman like that, asking those kinds of questions in a town like this? That is a recipe for trouble. The sheriff left, and Roswell sat there turning over this new information. What was Beatrice looking for? And why did it make him uneasy to think of her asking dangerous questions in a town where people did not like outsiders prying into their business? He found himself walking back to the boarding house, taking the stairs 2 at a time, driven by an urgency he could not explain. He knocked on her door, waited, knocked again. When she finally opened it, he could see she had been crying. "Mr. Turner, this is highly inappropriate. What are you looking for, Miss Vaughn? The sheriff tells me you have been asking questions around town." She stiffened. "That is none of your concern. It is if it puts you in danger." Pioche is not a forgiving place, especially not for a woman alone asking about things people would rather keep buried. For a moment he thought she would slam the door in his face. Instead, she stepped back and gestured for him to enter. He hesitated, aware of the scandal this could cause, but the look in her eyes made him step inside. She closed the door and leaned against it. "I had a sister," she said quietly. "Her name was Clara. She came to Pioche 3 years ago with her husband, seeking their fortune in the mines. He died in a collapse and she stayed on, working as a laundress. She wrote to me regularly, every week without fail. Then 6 months ago the letters stopped. I wrote to the sheriff, to the mining companies, to anyone I could think of. They all told me the same thing. Clara had left town, moved on. But Clara would never have left without telling me. We were all each other had after our parents died. You think something happened to her? I know something happened to her, and I came here to find out what. The teaching position was just a way to get to Pioche without raising suspicions." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I have been searching through records, talking to people who knew her. No one seems to remember much. It is as if she vanished into thin air." Roswell understood then. The ghosts she was running from were the living kind, the mysteries that haunted the survivors. And the dreams. She turned away from him, walking to the window that looked out over the dark street. "I dream of her calling to me. She is in a dark place, and she is afraid, and I cannot reach her no matter how hard I try. I know it is just my mind trying to make sense of her disappearance, but it feels so real. Sometimes I wake up and I can still hear her voice." He crossed the room to stand beside her, careful not to touch her but wanting her to know she was not alone. "I will help you find out what happened to Clara." She looked at him sharply. "Why would you do that? You do not know me. You have your own concerns." "Because it is the right thing to do. And because no one should have to face their ghosts alone." They stood there in the dimness, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection forged in shared pain and stubborn determination. Beatrice smiled then, a small thing but genuine, and it transformed her face. "Thank you, Mr. Turner. Roswell. If we are going to be partners in this, you should call me Roswell. Beatrice then, though most people call me B." He left her room feeling more purposeful than he had in months. His horse thief could wait. This was more important. The next morning, Roswell began his investigation in earnest. He started at the laundry where Clara Vaughn had worked, a steamy establishment run by a hard-faced woman named Margaret Stone. She was reluctant to talk at first, but when Roswell mentioned he was working with Beatrice, her expression softened slightly. "Clara was a good worker," Margaret said, scrubbing at a stubborn stain on a miner's shirt. "Quiet, kept to herself mostly, but reliable. Then one day she just did not show up. I asked around, but no one had seen her. After a week, I had to hire someone else. I needed the help." "Did she seem troubled before she disappeared? Scared of anyone?" Margaret paused in her scrubbing, her hands still in the soapy water. "Now that you mention it, there was something. A man had been coming around watching her. He never came in, just stood across the street, made Clara nervous. She mentioned it to me a few times. Did you get a look at him? Not a good one. He wore a hat pulled low, kept to the shadows. But he was tall, well-dressed. Not a miner, maybe a businessman or a ranch hand. Roswell filed this information away and continued his inquiries throughout the town. He spoke to the owner of the boarding house, where Clara had rented a room, to the merchant she had bought supplies from, to anyone who might have seen or heard something. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had kept to herself, working hard to survive in a harsh place, and then simply vanished without a trace. That evening, he met Beatrice at the schoolhouse. She had spent the day settling in, assessing the meager supplies and the rough-hewn desks where her students would sit. The building was a simple wooden structure with a pot-bellied stove in one corner and windows that looked out on the dusty street. I spoke to people who knew Clara, Roswell said, settling onto one of the desks. A woman at the laundry mentioned a man who had been watching her before she disappeared. Tall, well-dressed, kept to the shadows. Beatrice's face went pale. "The man in my dreams," she whispered. "I see him sometimes, standing in the darkness. I always thought it was just my imagination filling in details, but what if it is not? What if somehow I am seeing what Clara saw? Dreams are just dreams, but it is interesting that the description matches. We need to find out who this man is." She nodded, then changed the subject abruptly. "You said you were tracking a horse thief. The sheriff told you where he might be hiding. In one of the abandoned mining camps up in the mountains. But that can wait." "No, it cannot. We need money to continue this investigation. If there is a reward for recovering the horse, we should pursue it. Besides, I teach during the day. We can use the evenings for asking questions and the weekends for searching the mountains." Her practicality impressed him. She was right, of course. The rancher had offered a substantial reward for the return of his stallion, money that could buy them time and resources. "The sheriff said I should not go alone. The camps are dangerous." "Then I will go with you." "Absolutely not. It is too dangerous." She stood, her eyes flashing with determination. "My sister vanished in these mountains, Roswell. I am not some delicate flower to be protected. I can ride, I can shoot, and I can take care of myself. If you want my help finding your horse thief, I am going with you." They stared at each other, wills clashing, until finally Roswell nodded. He had a feeling he would regret this, but he also suspected she would follow him with or without his agreement, and at least this way he could try to keep her safe. They spent the next few days preparing. Roswell acquired a map of the mining camps from a prospector willing to part with it for a price, along with supplies for a mountain expedition. Beatrice arranged for a substitute teacher to cover her classes on Friday and Monday, giving them 4 days to search. She also proved she had not been exaggerating about her abilities, demonstrating her marksmanship with a rifle that had belonged to her father, and her skill with horses when she selected a sturdy mare from the livery. Thursday night, the dreams came again. Roswell heard the scream, softer this time, muffled as if Beatrice had tried to stifle it. He was at her door in moments, knocking gently. She opened it immediately as if she had been expecting him. "I have bad dreams," she admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "They come almost every night now. I see Clara in the darkness and I see the man watching her, and I feel such terror that I cannot breathe. I know it is not real, I know she is gone, but I cannot stop the dreams from coming." Roswell saw the exhaustion in her face, the way her hands trembled. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hands in his, steadying them. "I will stay with you," he said. "I will sit in that chair there, and when you wake from the dreams, I will be there. You will not be alone. You cannot. It is not proper." "I do not care about proper. You need sleep, and you cannot get it if you are afraid to close your eyes." He guided her back into the room, settled her on the bed, and took a seat in the wooden chair near the door. "Sleep, Bea. I promised I would be there when you wake, and I keep my promises." She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the moment she decided to trust him. She lay back on the bed, pulling the quilt over herself, and closed her eyes. Roswell sat in the chair, listening to her breathing slow and deepen as sleep took her. An hour passed, then two. Roswell fought his own exhaustion, keeping watch. When the nightmare came, he knew immediately. Beatrice began to thrash, her breathing turning rapid and shallow, small sounds of distress escaping her lips. He moved to the bedside, sitting on the edge of the mattress, and took her hand again. "Bea," he said softly, "you are dreaming. Come back, I am here." She woke with a gasp, her eyes flying open, wild with fear until they focused on him. Then something in her seemed to collapse, and she gripped his hand like a lifeline. "She was calling my name," Beatrice whispered. She was so scared, Roswell. I could feel her fear. It was just a dream. Was it? Or is some part of me trying to tell me something about what happened to her? He did not have an answer for that. Instead, he stayed there, holding her hand until her breathing calmed and the fear left her eyes. She did not let go of his hand, and he did not try to pull away. "Tell me something good," she said quietly. "Tell me something about your life that was not hard or painful. I need to think about something other than darkness." Roswell thought for a moment. "When I was 12, before everything fell apart, my mother and I went to a barn dance. My father was away, and she was so happy that night. She wore a yellow dress and danced every dance, and she laughed in a way I had never heard before. For those few hours, she was young again, and all the burdens she carried were gone. I remember thinking that was what life should be like, full of laughter and dancing and joy. I have been looking for that feeling ever since. Have you found it?" He looked at her, at the way the lamplight played across her face, at the trust in her eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. "I think I might be getting close." They sat like that until the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, talking in whispers about their lives, their losses, their hopes. And when Beatrice finally fell back asleep, her hand still in his, Roswell stayed beside her, keeping his promise. Friday morning found them riding into the mountains, following the map toward the first of the abandoned mining camps. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed, the trail narrowing to little more than a goat path in places. Beatrice proved to be as capable a rider as she had claimed, handling her mare with confidence even when the path became treacherous. The first camp was a bust. Nothing but collapsed structures and empty shafts that groaned ominously in the wind. The second was much the same. But at the third camp, they found signs of recent habitation, fresh horse droppings, the remains of a campfire that was no more than a day old, supplies stashed in one of the more stable buildings. "Someone has been here," Beatrice said, examining the tracks around the fire. "And recently." Roswell checked the building where the supplies were stored, finding beans, coffee, and other staples that would keep a man alive for weeks. "This is a hideout, all right, but whether it is Morris or someone else, I cannot say." They made camp some distance away, not wanting to alert whoever was using the site to their presence. As darkness fell, they took turns keeping watch. During Roswell's watch, he heard horses approaching and woke Beatrice silently. Together they crept to a vantage point where they could observe the camp. A man rode in leading a second horse, a beautiful bay stallion that Roswell recognized immediately from the description the rancher had given him. Caleb Morris had returned to his hideout. "That is him," Roswell whispered. "That is the horse thief. What do? We wait until morning. He will be tired from his ride and he will sleep heavy. We can take him then." But waiting proved harder than anticipated. As they huddled together behind the rocks, sharing body heat against the mountain cold, Roswell became acutely aware of Beatrice beside him. The way her shoulder pressed against his, the scent of her hair like lavender and wood smoke, the trust she had placed in him. "Roswell," she whispered, and he turned to find her face inches from his own. "Thank you for believing me about Clara, for helping me search for answers. You do not need to thank me." "Yes, I do. You could have dismissed me as a grieving sister seeing shadows where there are none. Instead, you are risking your life to climb mountains with me and catch horse thieves for money we need to continue searching. That is not nothing." He wanted to tell her that he would do more than that he would move mountains if she asked, that somewhere in the past few days she had become more important to him than he had thought possible. But the words stuck in his throat, too big and too frightening to voice. Instead, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, letting his fingers linger against her cheek. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing, and for a moment the cold and the danger and the darkness all fell away. Then a sound from the camp below broke the spell, and they turned their attention back to watching Morris. The night passed slowly, and when dawn finally came, they made their move. Roswell approached from one side while Beatrice circled around from the other, her rifle ready. Morris was just emerging from the building where he had slept, yawning and scratching, when Roswell stepped into view with his gun drawn. "Caleb Morris, you are under arrest for horse theft." Morris went for his gun, but Beatrice's voice rang out from behind him. "I would not do that. I am an excellent shot, and I will not hesitate to prove it." Morris froze, his hand hovering over his holster, then slowly raised his hands. "Who are you people?" "I am the man tracking you for the rancher whose horse you stole. And this is my partner, who is currently pointing a rifle at your back. Now, are you going to come quietly, or do we have to make this difficult?" Morris surrendered without further resistance, and they bound his hands and started the long trek back to Pioche. The return journey took most of the day, and by the time they delivered Morris to Sheriff Hendricks and returned the stallion to its grateful owner, night had fallen once again. The rancher paid the reward as promised, a substantial sum that would indeed fund their continued investigation. But more than the money, Roswell felt a sense of accomplishment, of partnership, that he had never experienced before. He and Beatrice made a good team. That night, without discussion, Roswell went to Beatrice's room when the boarding house grew quiet. She opened the door at his knock, unsurprised, and let him in. He took his place in the chair while she settled into bed, and they talked in low voices about the day's events, about their plans for investigating Clara's disappearance, about everything and nothing. When the nightmares came, he was there to wake her gently, to remind her she was safe, to hold her hand until the fear passed. And when she finally asked him to lie beside her, not for anything improper but simply because his presence seemed to keep the worst dreams at bay, he did not hesitate. They lay on top of the covers, fully clothed, her back pressed against his chest as he wrapped his arm around her waist. She fit against him as if she had been made for that exact spot, and for the first time in years, Roswell felt like he had found something worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth changing his wandering ways for. "I am falling in love with you," he whispered into her hair, not sure if she was asleep or awake, not sure if he wanted her to hear. "I know," she whispered back. "I am falling in love with you too." The admission hung in the air between them, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Roswell held her tighter, and she laced her fingers through his, and they fell asleep like that, two lost souls finding solace in each other. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Beatrice taught during the week, winning over her students with her patience and her genuine interest in their education. Roswell took jobs around town, building his reputation as a reliable hand and keeping his ears open for any information about Clara's disappearance. In the evenings, they met to share what they had learned, and at night he stayed with her, keeping the nightmares at bay. Their investigation into Clara's fate slowly began to yield results. Roswell discovered that several other women had disappeared from Pioche over the past few years, all of them young, all of them alone in the world. No one had connected the disappearances before, or if they had chosen to remain silent. Beatrice found a witness, an old Chinese woman who did laundry with Margaret Stone, who remembered seeing Clara get into a fancy carriage the night she disappeared. The woman had thought nothing of it at the time, assuming Clara had found herself a wealthy suitor, but now the memory took on sinister implications. A fancy carriage in a mining town, Roswell mused as they sat in the schoolhouse going over their findings. That narrows it down. There cannot be many people in Pioche who own such a thing. The mine owners, Beatrice said. The really successful ones, or perhaps a wealthy rancher from outside town. Sheriff Hendricks, when approached carefully, admitted that he had his suspicions about the disappearances but no proof. Women leave town all the time, he said. Without bodies, without witnesses, what am I supposed to do? But if you can find me evidence, real evidence, I will act on it. That evidence came from an unexpected source. One of Beatrice's students, a quiet girl named Emma whose father worked at the largest mine in town, approached her after class one day. "Miss Vaughn, can I tell you something? Something I am not supposed to know." Beatrice crouched down to the girl's level. "Of course, Emma. You can tell me anything. My pa, he drinks sometimes, and when he drinks, he talks. He said there is a man, an important man, who likes to hurt women. He said everyone knows but no one talks about it because the man has money and power. He said women go into his house and they do not come out." Beatrice felt her blood run cold. "Did your father say who this man is?" Emma nodded, her eyes wide and frightened. "Mr. Victor Thornton. He owns the Silver Queen mine. He lives in the big house on the hill." That evening, Beatrice told Roswell what she had learned. He listened grimly, his jaw tightening with anger. "Victor Thornton. I have heard the name. He is one of the wealthiest men in Nevada, owns half the mines in this county. If he is behind this, going after him will be dangerous. I do not care about danger. If he hurt Clara, if he killed her, I need to know. I need justice for her." Roswell took her hands in his. "Then we will get it. But we need to be smart about this. We need evidence and we need allies. If we go after Thornton without proof, he will crush us." They spent the next week carefully gathering information about Victor Thornton. He was 45 years old, a widower who had come to Nevada during the gold rush and made his fortune in silver. He was known for his lavish parties and his generosity to the town, but those who worked for him whispered about his temper and his appetites. Roswell managed to befriend one of Thornton's household staff, a young man named James who worked in the stables. Over drinks, James admitted that Thornton often brought women to his house late at night, women who left by the back door looking shaken and bruised. "But there was one who did not leave," James said quietly, glancing around to make sure they were not overheard. "About 6 months ago. I saw him carry her into the house, and I never saw her leave. When I asked about it, I was told to mind my own business or find myself at the bottom of a mine shaft." "What did she look like?" "Dark hair, pretty, wearing a laundress's apron. I remember thinking she looked scared, like she wanted to run but did not know how." Roswell's heart sank. The description matched Clara Vaughn. He met Beatrice that night and told her what he had learned. She listened in silence, her face growing paler with each word, until finally she stood and walked to the window, her hands clenched into fists. "He killed her. That monster killed my sister and probably others, and everyone knows but no one does anything. We are going to do something. But we need proof. We need to search his house. How? He has guards, servants. We cannot just walk in. Roswell thought for a moment. Thornton is having a party this Saturday, a big celebration for some business deal he closed. Half the town will be there. While everyone is distracted, we can search the house. It was a risky plan, one that could easily go wrong in a dozen different ways. But Beatrice agreed immediately, her grief and anger giving her courage. The days until Saturday passed in a blur of preparation. Roswell acquired formal clothing suitable for a party, and Beatrice altered one of her dresses to be more elegant. They rehearsed their story. They were a married couple new to the area, interested in investing in mining ventures. It was close enough to the truth to be believable. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the weather itself was conspiring to make the night memorable. Thornton's house sat on a hill overlooking the town, a massive structure of imported wood and glass that seemed to mock the humble dwellings below. Carriages lined the drive, and the sound of music and laughter drifted out into the night. Roswell and Beatrice entered together, her hand resting on his arm. She looked beautiful in her altered dress, her hair pinned up to reveal the graceful line of her neck, but her beauty was nothing compared to the fierce determination in her eyes. Thornton greeted them personally, a broad-shouldered man with silver hair and cold eyes that lingered too long on Beatrice. "Welcome, welcome. Always happy to see new faces. You must tell me all about your investment interests." They smiled and made small talk, playing their parts perfectly, all while Roswell noted the layout of the house and the positions of the guards. When the opportunity came, they slipped away from the party, making their way down a hallway toward what appeared to be Thornton's private wing. The house was a maze of rooms, each more lavish than the last. They searched quickly but carefully, looking for anything that might provide evidence of Thornton's crimes. In his study, they found ledgers detailing payments to various people in town, including Sheriff Hendricks. In a locked drawer that Roswell picked with a skill born from necessity, they found jewelry, women's jewelry, pieces that looked like they had been torn from their owners. And in a room at the far end of the hall, they found something that made Beatrice gasp. It was set up like a trophy room with photographs mounted on the walls. Photographs of women, all young, all beautiful, all wearing expressions of terror. And there in the center was Clara Vaughn. Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Roswell pulled her close, letting her bury her face in his chest while her shoulders shook with silent weeping. "We found her," she whispered. "Or at least we found proof she was here. We need to take these photos and get out of here. This is enough to bring Thornton down." But as Roswell reached for the photographs, a voice spoke from the doorway. "I am afraid I cannot let you do that." They spun to find Victor Thornton standing there, a gun in his hand and a smile on his face that never reached his eyes. "You are not investors at all, are you? You are that new schoolteacher and her cowboy friend. I have heard you have been asking questions about women who left town. I should have dealt with you sooner." Roswell positioned himself between Beatrice and Thornton. "Sheriff Hendricks knows we are here. If anything happens to us, he will come looking." Thornton laughed. "Hendricks does what I tell him to do. He has been on my payroll for years. No, I think what will happen is you two will meet with an unfortunate accident. Perhaps you got lost in the mountains and fell down a mine shaft. These things happen." But Thornton had made a mistake. He had been so focused on Roswell that he had not noticed Beatrice reaching into the pocket of her dress, where she kept the small pistol she had started carrying after learning about the other disappearances. She drew it now, her hand steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Drop your gun, Mr. Thornton." Thornton's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in calculation. "You would not shoot me. You are a schoolteacher, a respectable woman. You do not have it in you. You killed my sister. You killed all these women. I absolutely have it in me." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of music from the party. Roswell could see Thornton weighing his options, could see the moment he decided to call Beatrice's bluff. The mine owner's finger tightened on the trigger, and Roswell knew he had seconds to act. He lunged forward, grabbing for Thornton's gun arm. The weapon discharged, the bullet going wide and shattering a window. The two men struggled, crashing into furniture and walls. Beatrice tried to get a clear shot, but they were moving too fast, and she was terrified of hitting Roswell. Then James, the stable hand, burst into the room with two other servants Roswell recognized as men who had been quietly sympathetic to their investigation. They pulled Thornton off Roswell, restraining the mine owner even as he shouted threats and promises of retribution. "We heard the gunshot," James said, "and we decided we have been silent long enough. We know what he has done. We will testify to it." With Thornton secured, Roswell quickly gathered the photographs and the jewelry as evidence. Beatrice stood staring at the photo of her sister, tears streaming down her face. "I am so sorry, Clara," she whispered. "I am so sorry I could not save you." Roswell wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You found her. You brought her killer to justice. That is all you could do." The confrontation had not gone unnoticed. Other party guests had heard the gunshot and were crowding into the hallway. Sheriff Hendricks pushed through the crowd, and for a moment Roswell thought they were done for, that the corrupt lawman would side with his benefactor. But Hendricks surprised him. The sheriff looked at the photographs, at the jewelry, at Thornton restrained by his own servants, and something in his face changed. Perhaps there was a limit even to his corruption, a line he would not cross. "Victor Thornton, I am arresting you for the murder of Clara Vaughn and the other women whose faces are in these photographs." Hendricks's voice was steady, authoritative. "Take him to the jail." Thornton's protests faded as he was dragged away, and the crowd buzzed with shocked speculation. Roswell led Beatrice out of the house, away from the chaos, into the cool night air. They walked back to town in silence, hand in hand, processing everything that had happened. When they reached the boarding house, Beatrice finally spoke. "It is over. I found out what happened to Clara. I brought her killer to justice. I should feel relieved or satisfied or something, but I just feel empty. Grief does not end just because you get answers. It will take time to heal." She turned to face him, and in the moonlight he could see the exhaustion and pain in her eyes, but also something else. Determination, strength, love. "I do not want to be alone tonight, Roswell, not just because of the nightmares. I want you with me because you make me feel whole again. You make me feel like life is worth living." He cupped her face in his hands, brushing away her tears with his thumbs. "I am not going anywhere, B. I will be here tonight and every night after if you will have me. I will have you, today, tomorrow, always." He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. She kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a moment all the pain and darkness of the past weeks faded away, leaving only the warmth of their connection. They climbed the stairs to her room, and that night they did more than just sleep. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with reverence and wonder. And when Beatrice finally drifted off to sleep in his arms for the first time in months, no nightmares came. The trial of Victor Thornton became the biggest event in Pioche's history. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and once the dam broke, witness after witness came forward to testify about the women who had disappeared. The screams heard from his house late at night, the the threats he had made to anyone who questioned him too closely. Thornton was convicted and sentenced to hang, a fate that came swiftly in those days of rough justice. Beatrice attended the execution, needing to see it through to the end, and Roswell stood beside her, his hand in hers, supporting her through the final chapter of her sister's story. Sheriff Hendricks, to his credit, resigned his position and left town, unable to face the community he had betrayed. A new sheriff was appointed, an honest man who promised to do better by the people of Pioche. With the investigation concluded and justice served, Roswell and Beatrice faced a choice about their future. She had her teaching position, work that she found meaningful and important. He had his skills as a cowboy and ranch hand, talents that were always in demand. "I could find work on one of the ranches near town," Roswell suggested one evening as they sat together in the schoolhouse after her students had left for the day. "Stay close so I can be with you." Beatrice smiled, taking his hand. "Or I could tell the school board that I am getting married and moving on. Let them find another teacher. You love teaching. I will not ask you to give that up." "You are not asking. I am choosing." "Roswell, these children need someone who wants to be here, who is not haunted by ghosts and bad dreams. I came to Pioche searching for my sister and I found her, but I also found you. You are my future now. Let us build it together." He kissed her, marveling at his luck in finding this remarkable woman. "Where do you want to go?" "I heard there is a ranch down near Carson City that needs a foreman and his wife. They have a small schoolhouse on the property for the ranch hands' children. We could run the ranch and teach the children. It would be a good life, I think." It was a good life. They married a week later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Chen and James, the stable hand, as witnesses. Beatrice wore a white dress she had sewn herself, and Roswell wore his best clothes, brushed clean of trail dust. They spoke their vows with conviction, promising to stand by each other through good times and bad, through nightmares and dreams, until death parted them. The ranch near Carson City welcomed them with open arms. It was a sprawling operation with hundreds of head of cattle and a dozen ranch hands who needed strong leadership. Roswell proved himself quickly, his years of experience and his fair treatment of the men earning their respect. Beatrice took charge of the small school, teaching not just reading and arithmetic, but also music and art, enriching the lives of children who might otherwise have grown up rough and uneducated. The nightmares still came sometimes, but less frequently now, and when they did, Roswell was always there, just as he had promised. He would wake her gently, remind her that she was safe, hold her until the fear passed. And gradually, over months and years, the dreams of darkness were replaced by dreams of light, of the life they were building together. A year after they married, Beatrice told Roswell she was pregnant. He reacted with joy that bordered on terror, worried about all the things that could go wrong, desperate to protect her and their child from every possible harm. "I am not fragile," she reminded him with an amused smile as he fussed over her for the 100th time. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." "I know, but you are my woman, and that is my baby, and I am allowed to worry." Their son was born on a spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the hills, and the air smelled of new grass and possibility. They named him Thomas, after Roswell's maternal grandfather, the one good memory he had from his childhood. Thomas Turner came into the world hollering his displeasure at the cold and the light, and Roswell held him with shaking hands, awed by the tiny life he and Beatrice had created. "He is perfect," Roswell whispered, counting the baby's fingers and toes for the 3rd time. "He is ours," Beatrice replied, and that said everything that needed to be said. Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Clara, in memory of the sister Beatrice had lost. Little Clara had her mother's dark hair and her father's steady demeanor, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her older brother everywhere, determined not to be left behind. The years passed in the way years do on a successful ranch, marked by seasons of plenty and occasional hardship, by moments of joy and sorrow, by the steady accumulation of memories that make up a life well lived. Roswell became known throughout Nevada as one of the finest cattlemen in the territory, sought after for advice and respected for his honesty. Beatrice's school grew, eventually requiring her to hire an assistant teacher to help manage all the students. They prospered, not just financially but in all the ways that mattered. Their children grew strong and healthy, educated and kind. Their love deepened with each passing year, weathering the storms that every marriage faces and emerging stronger for having survived them together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Roswell took Beatrice back to Pioche. They had not returned since leaving, and both were curious to see how the town had changed. It was quieter now, the easy silver having been mined out, the population diminished as people moved on to new opportunities. But the schoolhouse still stood, and the church where they had married, and the boarding house where Mrs. Chen still welcomed travelers with her pragmatic kindness. They visited Clara Vaughn's grave, a simple marker in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. Beatrice placed wildflowers on the stone and stood in silence for a long moment, Roswell's hand in hers. "I miss her," Beatrice said finally. "I will always miss her, but I have made my peace with what happened. She would be happy for me, I think. Happy that I found you and built a good life. She would be proud of you, for seeking justice for her, for being strong when it would have been easier to give up." They left Pioche as the sun set, riding toward Carson City and home, and Beatrice realized that somewhere along the way, the nightmares had stopped completely. She no longer dreamed of darkness and fear. Instead, she dreamed of her children's laughter, of Roswell's arms around her, of sunlight on the hills and the endless sky above their ranch. The bad dreams had finally ended, replaced by the beautiful reality of the life they had built together. Years continued to unfold like the pages of a well-loved book. Thomas grew into a responsible young man, taking on more duties around the ranch and showing every sign of being a fine cattleman like his father. Clara proved to be as stubborn and determined as the aunt she was named for, with a quick mind and a fierce sense of justice that made her parents smile in recognition. 2 more children joined the family over the years. Another son named Robert, who had his mother's love of books and learning, and finally, a daughter named Sarah, who seemed to combine the best traits of both parents and quickly became the baby of the family everyone doted on. The ranch thrived under Roswell's management. He had a gift for knowing when to take risks and when to be cautious, for treating his employees fairly while still maintaining standards of excellence. Beatrice's school became renowned throughout the region, with parents sending their children from neighboring ranches because they knew she would provide not just education but wisdom and compassion. On the night of their 20th wedding anniversary, Roswell surprised Beatrice with a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time either of them had visited a major city since their youth, and they spent a glorious week attending theater performances, eating at fine restaurants, and walking along the waterfront watching the ships come and go. But as wonderful as the city was, they were both eager to return home to their ranch, their children, their life. They had built something precious together, something worth more than all the gold in California or silver in Nevada. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked one evening as they sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the hills. Their children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze, giving up the wandering life. You could have been anywhere, done anything, but instead you are tied to this ranch, to me, to our children. Roswell pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. I was lost until I found you, Bea. I did not know what I was looking for until that night in Pioche when I heard you scream, and something in me recognized that I had found my purpose. My purpose is to love you, to protect you, to build this life with you. I have never regretted a single moment, even the hard times. Especially the hard times. Those are the moments that prove love is real, when you stick together through difficulty and come out stronger on the other side. She turned in his arms to face him, and even after 20 years of marriage, the sight of her still made his heart race. I love you, Roswell Turner. You kept your promise. You were there when I woke from the bad dreams, and you stayed there every day after. I always will be, until my last breath and beyond. They kissed as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, and their children's laughter filled the air. And life was exactly as it should be. The years turned into decades. Their children grew up and married and had children of their own, filling the ranch with grandchildren who ran through the same fields where their parents had played. Thomas took over managing the ranch when Roswell's back started giving him trouble, proving himself every bit as capable as his father. Clara married a lawyer and moved to Carson City, where she worked tirelessly for women's rights and education reform. Robert became a doctor, serving the scattered communities across Nevada with dedication and skill. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son and settled close by, ensuring her parents were never far from at least some of their grandchildren. Roswell and Beatrice aged gracefully together, their hair turning silver, their faces gaining the lines that come from decades of laughter and love. They remained active as long as they could, Beatrice teaching until she was nearly 70, Roswell riding the range until his body finally insisted on rest. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration that brought together everyone whose lives they had touched over the decades. The ranch was packed with people, and speech after speech praised the couple for their generosity, their wisdom, their enduring love. But the moment Beatrice treasured most came late in the evening when the crowds had thinned, and she and Roswell sat alone under the stars, much as they had that first night in Pioche when he had sat in a chair and promised to be there when she woke. 50 years, she mused. Half a century. How did that happen, one day at a time? One moment of choosing each other, repeated over and over until suddenly a lifetime has passed. She leaned against him, feeling the solid comfort of his presence that had been her anchor through everything. No more bad dreams. You chased them all away. We chased them away together. That is what you do when you love someone. You face the darkness together until you find the light. In the end, Roswell died first, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84 with Beatrice holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, feeling his absence like a physical wound, but she did not break. He had taught her strength, and she honored his memory by living fully even in his absence. She lasted another 3 years, spending that time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about the grandfather they had loved, about the adventures she and Roswell had shared, about the importance of fighting for justice, and standing by the people you love. On the night she died, surrounded by her family, Beatrice closed her eyes and felt no fear, because she knew that Roswell would be waiting for her, just as he had promised all those years ago. He would be there when she woke, on the other side of the darkness, ready to take her hand and lead her into whatever came next. And if there were dreams in that final sleep, they were good ones. Dreams of a young cowboy knocking on her door to ask if she was all right. Dreams of riding through mountains together in search of justice. Dreams of a wedding and children and a life built on love and trust, and the simple, powerful promise to be there. The Turner Ranch continued to thrive for generations after. Each new generation told the story of Roswell and Beatrice, the cowboy and the schoolteacher who had found each other in a rough mining town and built something beautiful together. Their love story became legend in that part of Nevada, a reminder that even in the hardest places, at the darkest times, love could bloom and flourish and endure. The schoolhouse that Beatrice had built was eventually named in her honor, and a scholarship fund was established in her name to help children from poor families receive an education. A statue of Roswell on horseback stood in the town square of the community that had grown up around their ranch, commemorating his contributions to the cattle industry and his fair treatment of all people. But more than any monument or memorial, their true legacy lived on in the family they had created, in the values they had instilled, in the example they had set of what marriage could be when two people truly committed to each other. Their descendants spread across Nevada and beyond, but they all carried something of Roswell and Beatrice with them, a genetic memory of love and loyalty and the strength that comes from facing fears together. The story of how they met remained a favorite family tale, told and retold at reunions and holidays. The young people especially loved to hear about the bad dreams and the cowboy who promised to be there when she woke, who kept that promise not just through one night, but through 50 years of nights, who proved that the best kind of love is the kind that shows up, that stays, that refuses to let fear or hardship or time diminish it. And sometimes, on quiet evenings at the ranch that still bore their name, people swore they could feel their presence, a sense of peace and contentment that settled over the land like a benediction. Perhaps it was just imagination, or perhaps it was something more, the echo of a love so strong that it had seeped into the very soil, nourishing it the way their love had nourished each other. The truth was simple and profound. Roswell Turner had been a wandering cowboy looking for something he could not name, and Beatrice Vaughn had been a woman haunted by loss and bad dreams. They had found each other in the wilderness of Nevada during a time when life was hard and justice was scarce, and they had chosen to build something beautiful together. He had promised to be there when she woke, and he had kept that promise in every way that mattered. And in doing so, he had given her not just comfort but courage, not just companionship but a reason to believe in tomorrow, not just love but a home for her heart to rest in after its long journey through darkness. Their story was proof that the best promises are the ones we keep every day, in small ways and large, through actions that demonstrate commitment when words are not enough. It was proof that love, real love, is not about grand gestures but about showing up, about being present, about holding someone's hand through the night and still being there when morning comes. It was proof that even in the wildest places, even in the hardest times, two people who choose each other can create something that outlasts them, something that changes not just their own lives but the lives of everyone they touch. And it was proof that sometimes the best way to heal from bad dreams is to wake up to something good, something true, something worth believing in. For Beatrice, that something was Roswell. For Roswell, that something was Beatrice. For both of them, that something was the life they built together, one day at a time, one promise kept after another, until they had created a love story worthy of being remembered. The end came not with drama but with peace, as good endings often do. Their names were carved on a simple gravestone on a hill overlooking the ranch, side by side as they had been in life. The inscription reads simply, Roswell Turner and Beatrice Vaughn Turner. Beloved husband and wife, parents, grandparents. He promised to be there when she woke, and he kept his word. And somewhere beyond the stars, in whatever comes after this life, a cowboy held his wife close as she woke from her final sleep, welcoming her with the words he had spoken so many times before. "I am here, B. You are safe now. No more bad dreams." And there were not. There were only good dreams from then on. Dreams of a love that had conquered fear. Dreams of a partnership that had endured everything life could throw at it. Dreams of the beautiful legacy they had left behind in the form of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their story forward into the future. The Wild West that had brought them together was long gone, transformed by time into something gentler, something more civilized. But the lessons they had taught remained vital. Stand up for justice. Fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Love fiercely and loyally. Keep your promises. And never underestimate the power of simply being there for someone when they need you most. These were the truths Roswell and Beatrice had lived by. And these were the truths that ensured their story would be told as long as there were people who believed in love, who believed in commitment, who believed that even in the darkest nights, someone can come along and promise to be there when you wake, and mean it with their whole heart. And that promise, kept faithfully across a lifetime, was the most beautiful love story the Wild West ever knew.